fucking joke. No wonder the Avengers didn't take you, or the X-Men, and they'll take fucking anyone. I mean, you are a ridiculous, immature, half-wit moron. I have never met a sadder, more attention-starved, jabbering little prick in my entire life, and that says a lot, because I've been alive for more than 200 fucking years. And I'll tell you, that bald chick was right about one thing. You will never save the world. You couldn't even save a relationship with a goddamn stripper. And motherfucker, I wish I could say you die alone, but it's one of God's best jokes that you can't die, except that's on all of us. Oh, you got nothing to say, mouth?
Welcome to the 200th episode of the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and today we are talking about a big movie, Deadpool and Wolverine. And since it's the 200th episode, luckily we've got two guests, and that is Randy Allain and Kris Ingersol. Guys, how you doing today?
Hey, Perry, stoked to be here with you, brother. Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you on.
Yeah, I am also thrilled to be here, Perry. The last time we were in a podcast together, it was Batman related. I know you and Kris have some Batman experience, so it'll be nice to check out the Marvel side of the coin.
Yes, I was on both you guys on Batman by the Numbers, most recently with Kris in a more limited guest pool, as opposed to with Randy, where there was a whole bunch of people on. And after the show, I was telling Kris and the other guys on, anytime you want to come on the show, you're more than welcome to. And fortunately, it just worked out where Randy sent me an email and he's like, how about we do Deadpool and Wolverine? And perfect timing, because it had just come out on Disney Plus. I think I had just added it to my list. So I'm really excited to talk about this. But before we get too excited and jump too far into things, why don't you guys tell people a little bit about yourselves? Randy, let's start with you.
So my name, I'm really sorry. Just going to take that one from the top. I am Randy Allain, and last year I started a podcast called Media Lit. This was kind of a pet project that had been developing in the back of my mind for years. It's inspired by a class I used to teach at my high school that I've not been able to teach in a few years, but my favorite part of that course was when we got to just dig into a story and what it meant to us, apart from all of the industry stuff. The relationships you build, the way you get to know someone over a story means a lot to me. So I started up this podcast, and fate brought me to a Marvel Cinematic Universe book signing with one Kris Ingersol. He was my first guest on the show, where we talked about Batman Returns, which was a blast. I saw that bat signal that Kris is rocking behind him right now on our Zoom screens. And we just melded within a couple episodes. I asked Kris to come on full time as a co-host, and now we're best buds. And if I go more than a week without talking to him about a good story, life just isn't the same.
Very cool. And Kris, how about you?
And ain't that the truth, Randy? A week is too long, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
My name's Kris Ingersol. I'm just a big old nerd. I'm a voice actor and a stage actor, do a little bit of film and commercial work too. Anything creative, anytime I can play pretend, I'm a pretty happy guy. So when Randy came along to ask me to talk about some of the best pretend that I get to watch other people play, I was stoked to join him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a pretty good year of getting to podcast together and finding our way into a pretty robust community of podcasters like yourself, Perry.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
it's been great. Fortunately, we were able to connect through Alex Marcus at Pop Break, and that's how I ended up getting on Batman by the Numbers and meeting both of you. So that's one of the great things about this kind of thing, is being able to get to talk to other people like this. As listeners know, I'm in Japan, so I'm on the other side of the world, so I don't get to have those comic shop conversations anymore like I used to back when I was in high school or university. And you go on Reddit or social media, and sometimes it veers a little bit more towards the negative, so it can be tough to have those kind of like meaningful, fun conversations about nerd shit, and so I've really enjoyed being able to do this and being able to meet all these different people, such as yourselves, and And it's been a blast. It's been one of the best things about podcasting, and it's honestly it's the reason why I keep this show going, even when it's becomes a chore, even when it's got other stuff going on. It's just kind of like, yeah, but I want to talk with these guys though, and I want to talk with other people about this stuff.
Yeah, stories are great, but as Randy said, it's like sharing stories. It's the way stories build bridges between people that like really revs my engine. Love this stuff.
So I did want to talk a little bit more about the podcast you guys do together, Media Lit. So tell people a little bit more about it, because just the name in general got me very intrigued by it.
You know, Randy was kind enough to bring me into this project of his last year. We seek to treat every story like great literature, no matter what the media format might be it a great
Hmm.
song, a great album, a great episode, a great series or season of TV, a great movie, a poem, a short story.
Hmm.
If it is a story that somebody has listened to, experienced in some way in their lives, and it moved them, somehow impacted them, their character, the relationships in their lives, that's what we want to talk about. There's like no better conversation to have than that. So Randy had this
Yeah.
brilliant idea to bring on guests, let people assign us some homework. Here's the
Hmm.
movie that I love. You guys watch it, and we'll talk about why I love it so dang much. I think Randy and I do our
Mm.
best to celebrate the media as well as the relationship the person has to the media.
Yeah, I love the way that you phrased that, Chris, because I think at the end of the day, it's about the relationships. Chris Ingersol, were one of the first people to see my little media lit one-page description. So in addition to those deep dives into a piece of media, I've always wanted to mix up the lesson plan. So anytime we can take those characters, those stories, and play a game, we love to mix in some draft formats. We kicked off our draft and pitch format, which we recently applied to the 20th anniversary of the show Lost. And some of the community we met there just led us to put together our first hype episode, uh, where we, met with superfan Joe Garfine to help hype the global release of a Lost fan documentary. So that was a really cool thing. It was a whole new type of podcasting we never intended to do.
But that's all really cool. And you guys are you're tickling both the nerd bone in me and the scholar bone in me, because I've got a PhD in literature, and I teach
Oh,
classes on
nice.
this stuff. And one of the things that always kind of bugs me about not everybody, but a big chunk of like the academic scholarly community is the way that they kind of want to be dismissive of this kind of
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
stuff. And my whole thing is, you could get so many more people interested in media criticism if you give it to them, make it easy to swallow the medicine, and,
Hmm.
Yeah.
give them a way into this stuff. So I do that. Like, I like doing that. I like doing, these diving into even these, superhero movies. You can find Marxist analysis or feminist
Hmm.
analyses or anything like this in this kind of stuff. Like, it doesn't always
Mm-hmm.
have to be this dry literary stuff that, let's face it, a lot of the mass public is not going to be interested in. So there are other
Hmm.
ways to get people interested in this stuff. So I think what you guys are doing and your approach here, it sounds amazing. I love that.
Thank you,
Incredibly
brother.
kind of you to say. Thank you.
Excited.
And so, because we are talking about superhero stuff in general here, what has been your introduction to superheroes? So, Kris, let's start with you this time.
You know, I'm a child of the late 80s, right? And so I was coming in on the cusp of the merchandise boom, the action figures, the t-shirts, right? Batman 89, the merchandise associated with that, all the cross promotional merchandise, the McDonald's toys for returns, all of that happening around superhero stuff brought me in as a kid. So before I ever picked up a comic book, I was like fascinated with the superhero action figures at KB Toys. I had the fantastic Batman, the animated series in my childhood, the Spider Man animated series, the X-Men 90s animated series. This is how I fell in love with superhero storytelling. And then I found comic books. Then I found the source material and I developed and matured that love for this content and for these characters. But it really started with those fantastic 90s cartoons, which all had banging music. It was like that perfect
Hmm.
combination of great animation, good storytelling, and phenomenal music.
Yeah. Oh man, you're getting me right in the feet in the nostalgia there. Like I was the same way. Like I was such a big action figure kid growing up. You know, I was born in 83, so I was coming up of age in the late 80s, early 90s. So it was, you know, for me it was Ninja Turtles. That was like the big thing that
Hmm.
really first got me interested in this kind of stuff. And then from there, I remember one time I was in Toys R Us and I was with my grandfather, and there's this one figure, and it's this
Mm,
guy in a brown suit with these pop out claws, and he had this
yes.
mask that you could clip on, and his hair was styled in these like wolf ear type things. And I just picked that up, and
Hmm.
I said to my grandfather, I'm like, I want this. He's like, Do you know who this is? I'm like, Nope, but I want it. and that was
Yeah.
and that was my first that was my first introduction to the X-Men. That was my first Wolverine action figure, and it wasn't until like I think like a year or two later that X-Men 92 came out on the air, and I'm just like, oh wait, that's that action figure I
Hmm.
have. And you know, it just opened up all these new doors for me. And plus, like, you know, you were talking about Batman 89. I've said before that Batman Returns, the summer of 92, that was my
Hmm.
Batmania summer because
Hmm.
I had always had 89 on VHS. I don't remember when I first watched it, but it always like been part of my memory.
Hmm.
Same thing with the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, but Batman 92, that was when I was first clued into stuff. It was like I was like
Hmm.
9 years old at the time, 9 years old, somewhere right there on the cusp. And just like the McDonald's toys, the bed sheets, the action figures, and then right after Batman Returns, then we had Batman the Animated Series come in, and then
Yeah.
it was that, and then X-Men, and it's just like it was a snowball effect for me.
Hmm.
Yeah. Couldn't
Randy, how about
miss.
you?
Yeah, I love that you guys both dug into the marketing of it all because that really is where the story begins, isn't it? I was born in 84, and one thing that's interesting to me is my first big superhero property was Masters of the Universe, He-Man, etc. But the weird thing is, I was so little, I don't really remember watching it.
Same
There is
here.
photographic evidence of me with the toys. I think I
Hmm.
even did a He-Man Halloween costume at some point. There is a photo of me with a bunch of He-Man action figures at the picnic table on a fateful day where I proceeded to lose every single action figure in an epic battle. Like if you could excavate the yard at my childhood home, which is actually now the home I live in today, you would find these He-Man figures, right? But like even before I think of the Batman the Animated Series, I think of the PJs with the Velcro on cape. You know the one. I had a Batman and a Robin. I watched a lot of the old Adam West Batman when I was a kid, which was a total blast. But Perry, you nailed it. Like I said before, 84, it was the Ninja Turtles. In fact, the office I am in right now was my childhood bedroom once upon a time. So I'm in this room imagining like little pieces of string and things that I like tied to different pieces of furniture in my room so the turtles could like slide down them like into battle across the room against someone else.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, like my intellectual curiosity, it started with the X-Men animated series. My friend on my soccer team, I think, was watching it, so I started watching it, and it just imprinted. And I didn't get the full bug. Like I didn't actually catch all the Batman the animated series as they were coming out when I was a kid. But then they started marketing to me as a teenager. You had the X-Men films come out, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies that were such a phenomenon. And it just kind of evolved over time. And I've kind of stopped and started, pulled back from it. But once I gave myself into the MCU and I started reading more comics and going back to some of these old series, I feel like I'm home. I finally got to the place I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, that's always how it is. Like even I remember I've gone through those phases too, like when I was in university and pulling
Hmm.
away from getting like 60 titles a month at one point in high school, and then when not having any money in university and having to stop collecting, and then slowly getting back into it here and there through trades and whatnot. And now, you know, we got stuff like Marvel Unlimited, which is great. It makes it so much easier to dive back into stuff and to discover new stuff. um DC Universe Infinite as well, but I'm not going to get on my rant about how they don't make it available here in Japan, even though I'm willing to pay for it.
No,
No,
really?
it's I have sent them emails about it. I'm like, why don't you guys make this available to us here? And they're like, oh, well, because of licensing issues. I'm like, but your stuff's all on Comixology, so it doesn't make any sense.
Oh
So
man,
I don't know. It's a pain in the ass. So and like
Wow.
recently they came out with the Superman Triangle era omnibus, and I'm like, I want to buy this, and I look online for the Kindle, and it's only in hardcover. And I'm just like, why are you guys doing this? I want to give you my money, DC, and you're not letting me.
yeah, take my money, please. Oh, that's
But
too
anyway,
bad.
yeah, it's a pain in the ass. But anyway, so well, that's a nice little transition. Anything you guys are interested in lately? Not necessarily for your podcast or anything like that, but just in general, anything that's kind of grabbing your interest. Randy, how about you?
I chuckled a little bit when you asked that question because uh, with our podcast Media Lit, I kept the doors so wide open to what we can talk about there that there's almost nothing I'm watching without thinking of it as a possible podcast topic. But I think fate brought me to wear my Owl House T-shirt today with a little map of the Boiling Isles. And that is one television show that Kris went back and watched with me so that we could guest host Saturday Morning Adventures on the Pop Break. Uh, and I already loved watching this show with my son, but I think Kris and I like really bonded over this storytelling. And I find myself like preaching the gospel of the Owl House to anyone who will listen to this day, because I think a lot of people missed that one. And I think they'll be disappointed to know they missed it when they finally catch
I've
up.
never heard of this before.
It's really very good. Yeah,
So it's called
really
The Owl
very
House.
good. Hmm.
Yeah, but it's a Disney animated series. It ran for
Okay.
2 full seasons, a truncated third season of excellent specials. Um, but yeah,
It's just it's just a show that hits the ground running in terms of the charm of its lore. You're very quickly swept up into this world and desperate to learn more about what makes the world itself really work. It's really well made lore.
yeah,
Okay. Awesome. Cool. And
kind of like
Kurt,
a dark cousin to Harry Potter with
okay.
better representation.
Okay. Cool. I'll have to check that out, especially because it's I just looked it up here. It looks and might be something my kids are get interested in too. So that'd be really cool. Kris, how about you?
All right, so I thought I was going to come here and talk strictly comic books because I've been like totally taken by this absolute universe that DC is cooking up. I'm not sure if you've
Yes.
it's good, man. Absolute Batman is really good. Absolute Wonder Woman is really, really good. And so I've been immersed in that world lately, desperate for the next issues to hit that DC Universe Infinite app. I've got the Ultras. I'm not catching the issues when they first hit the shelves, but I'm a few months behind and desperate to be fed more. I thought that's what I was going to come here and highlight and give its solo time. But then recently I picked up The Last Halloween, Jeff Loeb stepping
Oh,
back into the world of The Long Halloween. Have you read this, Perry?
I have not. Like modern Jeff Loeb is really difficult for me.
Hmm.
Like ever since his Wolverine stuff, it's been very, very hit or miss.
I tend to agree. I tend to agree. It's nice to have him back in this particular world with this Jim Gordon, this Batman, um, this Gotham. I've really enjoyed it so far. I'm at the end. I just finished the second issue, so I've got the third to go, and it's been wonderful to kind of close this story arc for Batman that began with the Long Halloween once upon a time. So I thought I was going to come and talk pure comics, but then my daughter and I were looking for a new show to start watching, and I introduced her to an old show. We were talking sidekicks, we were talking superheroes, we were playing a pretend game, and all of a sudden I realized that I hadn't shown her Young Justice yet.
Ah.
And so if anybody out there listening to this now has not ever given the cartoon series Young Justice a chance or a try, my gosh, Randy
Oh,
Allain,
Randy, you have got to
we
get
need
on
to
that.
talk. It's like, so Perry, it's like the rare joy of watching a show grow up its characters over time, right? This isn't a comic book world where everybody's stuck in static. It's a show that wants to talk about legacy, about the passing on of mantles, about the maturation of a person over time. And so I just started season 1 again of Young Justice, and man, I forgot how good that very first season really is. Right, I've been living in the later seasons more recently. You've got Nightwing, you've got the mature heroes. It's so good to be with young Dick Grayson again, whose like signature move, Randy, you'll love this.
Mm-hmm.
You hear his laugh. He's gone. He's disappeared from his fellow heroes. He's pulled a Batman. You just hear him cackling away into the fray of the fight because he loves what he does so much as Robin. Man, the show was really good.
It is great. That
No.
first season was just complete magic. And it was one of those shows that when the descriptions of it were coming out, like I remember on the message boards and stuff, people are like, wait, they're gonna be like the Justice League stealth team or something. It sounded like a really weird
Hmm.
concept. They weren't really doing the justice in the marketing in advance.
Mm-mm.
And then I went and I started watching it. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's such a great show. It introduced this awesome new version of Aqualad, which has now made the jump into the comics.
Totally.
And I was never like I mean, like for me, Young Justice is the comic book Young Justice. So it's the Connor Kent
Mhm.
Superboy, the Tim Drake
Mhm.
Robin and Impulse and Cassie Sandsmark Wonder Girl and Secret and Arrowhead and all of them. So that was my Young Justice. So I was kind of I was never a Teen Titans guy. I never really got into them too much. So I was kind of predis whatever the word is, you know what I'm talking about. I wasn't really set to like this thing. I wasn't primed for it, but it grabbed me from the first episode and it was really good, really well done. And one of my favorite moments that stands out in my mind still is because they do spotlight the Justice League characters here and there. And when they were talking about their sidekicks and Wonder Woman is taking Batman to task for bringing in Robin as his sidekick. You know, he's like a 14-year-old kid, and Batman has this great line, and it gives the perfect explanation for why Batman has Robin. And he says Robin needed to find his parents' killer. And then Wonder Woman says, why? So he could be like you. And Batman says, no, so he wouldn't.
Yes.
Yep.
So good, man. So very good.
Now, is this separate from Teen Titans or?
It is. It's separate from Teen Titans, but it does conceptually give you a similar vibe to begin with. You kind of see the formation of that
Okay.
first sidekick super team. It's in a universe that assumes Teen Titans have never existed. So it's sort of
Okay.
I mean,
Nope,
the
got
first
it.
season is basically Teen Titans. It's just they couldn't call it
Yes.
that
Yep.
because that was already used somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Gotcha.
amazing. I'm glad you're getting your daughter interested in that. That is very good show. The later seasons, it kind of lost me a little bit, to be honest. I felt like I love what you said about the growing up aspect was a good point, but I felt like they kind of jumped a little bit too far and they kind of expanded the cast too much, and I felt kind of disconnected from with all these characters that were coming in.
I'll say, especially that last season, felt a little bit like the Arrowverse did at the end. Not the Arrowverse, but the show Arrow, where Arrow
Yeah.
became this breeding ground and jumping off point for just like a whole bunch of different potential heroes. And at one point, that show was really crowded with like maybe not your favorite superheroes, anyways. Like we didn't have to crowd the screen with Wildcat, for instance. He's
Yeah.
great on the page, but we didn't need him on the screen. And perhaps Young Justice gets a little bit like that in the end. But I think I chalked it up to one of those generational moments where I realized, these new seasons, they're carrying on the legacy of the original show, but they're not making it for me. They are making it for that next audience.
Yeah. So my stuff is kind of related to that. I had just finished my Adventures with Superman season 2.
Oh,
It was okay. It didn't impress me as much as season 1 did. But it was still pretty good. And then that got me into and plus like I have been watching Superman and Lois and loving it, and I didn't get a chance to watch it last night, the finale, but so nobody say anything, but I am just so stoked to watch that final episode. Like I've seen the trailer for it. I have that show has become like that's like my perfect version of Superman right there. Like Tyler Hoechlin is just like I can relate to him so hard. Is just like, you know, when he's being, you know, Clark Kent and he's like the nerdy dad and everything. Like I that gets me so much because I'm like, this is me. Like this is what I imagine my life's gonna be like in, you know, 15 years when my kids are teenagers and they're embarrassed by me, you know, being a big ass nerd in front of them in public.
yeah. Yeah. It is the best, one of the best versions of Superman you could ask for in terms of capturing the heart of the character. And he looks good. That first episode where they put him in the classic suit, the simple S, so
Yes,
he
the
could
Fletcher
catch the
symbol.
car. Oh, it's unbelievable. Really good stuff.
And then right down to the, then when the kid says, "I like your costume," he's like, "Thanks, my mom made it for me."
My
Oh,
mom made it.
perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. You just want to like give him a hug or a high
Mhm.
five. He's the best.
Mhm. And
I'm
unlike when Dean Cain delivered that line, because I know Dean Cain said that line too in Lois and Clark, but he felt like a little bit. Dean Cain just doesn't have that earnestness about him. But
Mhm.
Tyler Hoechlin, when he says that line, he's not joking. He's being earnest
yes.
about it.
Dean Cain says it, and almost like he knows it's cute. Tyler Hoechlin says it, and it's like so genuine. It's so authentic and charming. I'm not
Mhm.
surprised that you didn't love season 2 of My Adventure with Superman maybe as much as the first season. But come on, Michael Emerson as Brainiac,
That was great. Yes.
unreal voice performance.
Yes, he did an excellent job as Brainiac. I will give you that. But anyway, like I said, today we were talking about Deadpool and Wolverine, 2024 movie, which kind of introduces Deadpool to the MCU. We can kind of talk about how that happens, and may or may not be Hugh Jackman's last outing as Wolverine. First movie where we get him in the yellow suit, and I got a bunch of notes, but let's just dive into it. What was your first off, what is your relationship? I know you guys are both X-Men 92 fans, you were saying, but how about Deadpool? What is your connection with Deadpool? Is it you mostly come in through the movies? Were you into Deadpool in the comics or anything like that?
So I primarily was introduced to Deadpool through the movies, but not his movies. His appearance in Deadpool and Wolverine. I'm sorry, X-Men
X-Men Origins?
Origins Wolverine. Thank you. That introduced me to the character. And at the time, I was already like a Ryan Reynolds fan. As like an aspiring actor, his career was something I always like aspired to. He got to do comedy, romantic comedy, raunchy comedy, action comedy, comic book movies. And so the character he was playing like already like had my favor. He had been in Blade Trinity. It felt like he was doing a similar sarcastic, quippy kind of action guy.
I always say that Blade Trinity feels like his Deadpool audition tape.
I completely agree with you there. Absolutely. So I was intrigued by the character through that film and then started picking up the comics and like Deadpool kills the Marvel universe and all sorts of classics. And I was like, it's not my favorite character. It's not my favorite artwork. It's a version of me. It's an expression of a really specific facet of my imagination. And so that's how I found my way to Deadpool. And I was a huge fan of the first movie. I think that was like about as fun as superhero cinema gets.
I can lightly tap the fourth wall as well. The proposal.
So good. So good.
I bring that up for two reasons. One is I did not have a pre-existing relationship with Deadpool until this Ryan Reynolds iteration. Uh, and yes, I had watched The Proposal with my wife long before I could tell you what a Deadpool was. I think a lot of those bonus X-Men movies, the X-Men Origins Wolverine, they kind of came out during one of my stepped back periods from comic book storytelling. So I missed a lot of that. But you couldn't miss the phenomenon, right? So I'm getting Deadpool at the same time they're trying to release things like Suicide Squad. You're getting these different guys with cool masks and a gun type of heroes. So I was kind of learning in real time as that landscape came to life for me. But I finally watched Deadpool, and I loved it for two reasons. Number one, I am an English teacher, and I love me some metafiction. I love to shatter that fourth wall, not just lightly tap it.
Yeah.
So anytime art is commenting upon itself, I am in. So I loved the first Deadpool. However, I am certainly one of the people that thought Deadpool 2 was superior to the first Deadpool. Um, and I think why it appealed to my sensibilities a little bit more is that like I have a little bit of a short leash for like the sophomoric and the gross out kind of lewd humor. And the second movie was more interested in showing me its heart as well. And I think Deadpool and Wolverine is definitely trying to find that balance from start to finish. How much of each thing do they want to do? Um, but I'm excited for more of this type of storytelling. And I'd love to see more of it. So yeah, let's shatter that fourth wall. Let's comment upon what we're seeing. Um, and for folks who have maybe heard me on a Batman by the Numbers before, I do love that subversion of the superhero quite a bit. Whether it's, you know, Lego Batman or, you know, I'm not familiar with Young Justice, but I do love Teen Titans Go, which can be surprisingly clever at times.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess I'm coming in from the most Deadpool experience here because I got into him in the comics. So back in the early aughts when I was reading everything, I started reading Deadpool too, and I started off with the Christopher Priest run. Most people know him from Black Panther, and even he has kind of like dismissively referred to his time writing Deadpool. But it got me interested in the character, and then I went back and I read the Joe Kelly run, which was incredible. Gail Simone stuff. Gail Simone did an excellent run on it too. But unfortunately, like a lot of other Deadpool comics, I felt like it's not quite missing. It's not quite hitting the mark with a lot of it. So Deadpool's always been a character that I think conceptually I've always been more interested in his potential than a lot of the execution, with some exceptions. But one of the things I think, and Randy, I tend to agree with you. I think I prefer Deadpool 2 as well. And I think one of the reasons why is because I loved the Cable and Deadpool comic book. And I think when Deadpool works at his best is when he has a straight man to play off. And so you had that in Deadpool 2, whether it's, you know, playing off of Cable or to a lesser extent Domino. And then you have that in this movie where he's playing off Wolverine. So the straight man, having that straight man aspect really helps it work. Whereas if it's Deadpool by himself, he can get a little bit grating. Like I know that's the common complaint a lot of people have had with him. And Ryan Reynolds, like I remember way back after the first X-Men movie came out, and Fox had announced back then that they had cast Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. And my first thought was, the Van Wilder guy? What? Because it seemed ridiculous at the time. And this movie was just constantly being talked about. And then I saw Blade Trinity. And like I said, after I saw Blade Trinity, I'm like, oh, I see it now. I can see him as Deadpool. And then we got X-Men Origins Wolverine, which I'd recently rewatched that too. And it's heartbreaking what they did to him in that movie. And then when Fox said that they decided to shelve the Deadpool movie and that footage leaked, which someone's gotta, you know, I am not convinced that Ryan Reynolds is not the one who leaked that footage. I'm a believer. A fairly good chance. Yeah. And then we got that movie and it was amazing. And and like you said, it is this subversive thing too. Like one of the cool things about these Deadpool movies is that they're part earnest superhero movie, but they're also part superhero parody. They work on both levels. And I think it's a great line that all three of these movies walk. And even when I've got some criticisms of the story or here and there, and we'll talk about that. I definitely have some of those with this movie, but just when you're sitting there and you're watching it, it's just, you know, you just get fully absorbed in this character. And Ryan Reynolds he's one of these actors who he gets a lot of criticism for basically playing the same character all the time. But honestly, I like that character, so I don't mind watching him do the same thing. And like you mentioned, The Proposal, I had no interest in that movie, and then about a year ago, it was on Disney Plus or something here, and my wife put it on, and I'm like, all right, let's watch it. And I was surprised at how charmed I was at that movie.
I'll take it back to Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place.
Yeah, I've never seen that, but definitely I remember people talking about that at the time.
That's a throwback.
Yeah. But we'll talk more about the movie. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come right back, and we'll talk about Deadpool and Wolverine. Since you're listening to this show, I already know you love watching superhero movies and TV shows, and you just might enjoy superhero comics. But how about superhero novels? I'm giving away 2 free superhero novels and 1 free superhero short story. Visit percivalconstantine.com/SCP to get access to Vanguard, Heroes Forged, the first novel in my own Avengers and X-Men inspired superhero novel series, and Ronin Born, my cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic Japan. I'm also throwing in Fire and Lightning, a free prequel story to my new Power Rangers inspired superhero series, Omega Knights. So visit percivalconstantine.com/SCP, those are just the letters SCP, to get started, or click on the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Okay, so Deadpool and Wolverine. Let's talk about this. Deadpool's ostensible introduction to the MCU,
Hmm.
which he doesn't quite get into the MCU necessarily by the end of it, which I thought was kind of that's one of the criticisms I have about this movie. But one of the things I thought that this movie did great, and I liken it to two other movies that did something very similar, is Spider-Man: No Way Home and The Flash. And I liken it like Spider-Man: No Way Home. It's got, and like The Flash, it's got ton of fan service. Unlike The Flash, it feels like they actually like that fan service they're doing. They actually like these characters that they're referencing. Whereas in The
Mhm.
Mhm.
Flash, it felt like they almost had disdain for the people who wanted the fan service. Um, so it felt much more in the Spider-Man No Way Home vein, while at the same time poking some fun at itself for what it was doing. And and one of the criticisms I have of No Way Home is that the plot doesn't really quite hang together as well as I would like it
Mm.
to when I think
Mhm.
about it. And this one, I think it hangs together a little bit better, but and I think the fact that it is this part parody movie makes it easier to swallow the times when it doesn't hang together. But overall, what did you guys think of this movie? First impressions of this, and then when you're rewatching it for today. Kris, let's start with you.
So, first impression of the movie was in the cinema. Went with my brother, with a couple of buddies, and we had a blast. It was the like a perfect cinema experience. I walked out of that theater with like a sore face from the smiles and the laughter. My jaw was like my mouth was gaping open from the first scene, from
Hmm.
the first brutal action scene where he absolutely desecrates the dead body of Wolverine to the tune of In Sync. I was having a blast. And that's the
Mhm.
best thing I can say about a movie is that it was fun to see it at the cinema, right? Like that's why you want to go to the movies. I left this world for a while. I escaped into another one, an absolutely absurd one, an absolutely bloody one, and I had a blast. So any of the things that I would later experience during my rewatch, like heavy-handed exposition, some running forward through convenient plot devices to make sure our characters are where they need to be for the
Mhm.
moment that we want
Mhm.
them to have. All of that was like totally missed during the theater experience. I had a blasty blast. To your point, Perry, though, that stuff even at home, which did stand out to me in a rewatch, which you might bump into or roll your eyes at a little bit. It's hard to ever really fault the film because it's calling itself out for that stuff at the moment that it's doing it, whether it's through a direct fourth wall break or just a comment that Deadpool is making. We call
Mhm.
out the heavy-handed exposition. We call out the absurdity of certain character moments. We would look and literally wink at the camera, which makes it all work perfectly for me.
Randy, how about you?
So I am absolutely a fan of this movie. Like Kris said, especially that first viewing in the theater in a huge crowd. It really played to the crowd quite well. There was a lot of fun. There was a lot of spectacle. I managed I managed to avoid the spoilers. I mean, I knew I was going to get cameos that I was not necessarily expecting, but they landed really well for me. I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about Gambit in this film, being really special. And I am here to sit and talk about why I love this movie, what works about this movie, and what I want to take seriously. But I do have two beefs with this movie that I feel like I just need to establish beforehand. And that is something they do in this movie that I don't love, and I think I will love it less and less each time, is the easy pot shots at the larger MCU, and leaning into this vibe of a very toxic fandom that has, at times rightly questioned the quality of some properties. But I think we've also allowed a really toxic section of the fandom to really go after some pretty great content, or content that's received more hate. So like there are a couple moments like when Deadpool delivers lines like I don't want to get canceled again or I identify as a feminist. Those jokes, I have a hard time reading them any other way than they were there to appeal to the toxic fandom. Like making jokes about identity politics at the expense of people was how I felt with those two jokes. there are other ways that this movie is a lot more open-minded, and that's what I want to focus on because at the end of the day, I love the movie. But yeah, that's a little thing going on with Deadpool that took me out of this movie a little bit, especially on a rewatch. Kris,
I
you
had a
look.
different reading of
Yeah.
those moments you're talking about. Like my reading was, I felt like it was Deadpool was, being sarcastic and criticizing those
Mhm.
people when he said that. Like when he's making the joke about the woke mob and all that. I really felt
Sure,
like he
sure.
was calling that stuff out as opposed to trying to appeal to them. But one of the problems you have with satire, and there are countless examples of this nowadays, is that I remember Lewis Black once said that there's the line between reality and satire is completely gone now.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's an interest. Yeah, go ahead, Kris. I'm
I was
sorry.
gonna say, I think it's a basic trust for Ryan Reynolds that lets me receive jokes like that with some open-handed grace. I think like when he says, it's okay, I identify as a feminist. I think that he probably would say that he's a feminist, like as Ryan Reynolds is the person. But it's also hilarious to think about a person actually saying that in real life to excuse the absurd thing that they just said. And so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think I trust him to be making thoughtful, humorous commentary that works on a number of levels because first
yeah,
I trust his character. And so I don't anticipate that it's
yeah.
um that there's any part of him that sort of aligns with that more toxic vein of the fandom, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the reason it's hitting me so wrong is like, is because I work at a high school, in this current political climate of the United States where there are these like organized efforts to, go after like reading materials at schools and things like that. And there are like these certain myths out there that bad actors like to play around with and call jokey satire, but it's really an attempt to go after identities. So like what are these like jokey myths people like to play around with is like oh, schools are putting litter boxes in bathrooms because some kids identify as cats, and it's being thrown out there as a way to mock the notion of uh identity, gender identity. And so I think that's why it was hitting those bars so hard for me because that's been such a painful and frustrating thing I've been dealing with. Uh, it's hard for me not to picture the people who are going to laugh for the wrong reason. That being said, I am personally happy to move on from that because that's just something I want to keep in mind when I watch something on the screen. Because at the end of the day, we have something with a lot of heart here that I really love, and I think it is trying to find the humanity in Deadpool, and that's why I love the movie, despite a couple notes. It's pretty much that, and just they really need to give Vanessa a character again.
That would be my biggest criticism. It would be the
Mhm.
Vanessa character really suffers in this movie for sure.
Yeah, but no, that I and I know you want to move on for this, so I just one more thing I wanted to mention about that is I totally get that perspective too. Is you're
Yeah,
coming at it from a much more firsthand personal perspective than me, where I'm watching this stuff completely detached from all of that, so it doesn't hit me in the same way. I mean, I
yeah,
can't imagine what it must be like to have
yeah.
to deal with this kind of climate, especially in
No.
schools.
Oh yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
ridiculous, and like
And I
I don't
just
have
want
to
to.
deal with any of that stuff.
And the beautiful things, I just want to say, like, it's not like a right versus wrong thing. Like, I think that you guys are reading it, and especially like this world of podcasting I've been involved in the last year, I've gotten to know so many smart people, and like there is a satirical read on that film. You know what I mean? Like that's also a smart and correct read of the film. So I'm just so happy I'm chatting here with people who can read that in a nuanced and thoughtful way. So thank you both for being wonderful.
Buddy.
Well, right back at you.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the cameos, and I had I had seen something about the Electra cameo, so I was expecting
Hmm.
Jennifer Garner. I wasn't expecting the Gambit cameo, but the one that really threw me, that got me really excited, was Blade. Like as soon as
Yes.
he steps out, I'm like, holy shit, it's Blade. And my wife, I'm sitting and I'm watching the theater with my wife, and my wife is like looking at me, she's like, what is wrong with you?
No, what is wrong with everybody who's not on their feet right now in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's the one you never thought you'd see again, right? For all the character names you could have thrown out there, all of the characters you could have hoped to see on that screen, Reed Richards from the first Fantastic Four,
Mm-hmm.
maybe Thomas Jane's Punisher, even.
Mm-hmm.
I never
Mm-hmm.
in a million years thought that we would get Wesley Snipes back, not only because of like the current fraught nature of the Blade project, which is now
Mm-hmm.
there is no Blade project, I suppose, but also just because of the real life relationship between Wesley Snipes and Ryan Reynolds, which was like
Yes.
notoriously not
Yeah.
not great. So this is a
Yeah, like
total treat.
you watch Blade Trinity and you just see Snipes' contempt for Ryan Reynolds in every scene they're in together. And I know Wesley Snipes has tried to walk this back recently. He says like, "No, it was
Yeah.
always just a joke." I'm like, "I don't know about that." It doesn't feel like it was a joke, especially when you heard some of Patton Oswalt's stories about the set. Um but yeah, that cameo just completely threw me for a loop. And then when we saw the card at first, I thought we were going to get Taylor Kitsch coming back as Gambit. So I was bracing myself for Taylor Kitsch. Then when I saw Channing Tatum, I'm like, oh yeah. So that one took me out of it for a moment. I had to
Yeah.
mentally process it a little bit.
Yeah, I had a blast with that one too, though,
Mm-hmm.
because again, they never let the joke really lie. Every chance he
Mhm.
gets to remind you that he never actually got a movie, he does. When they're like, our
Mm-hmm.
universe
I
is,
feel like I was born here.
yeah, it's all, um, you could say heavy-handed, but I think it's just brilliant. He's so
Mhm.
genuine and lovable.
I took a couple shots at this movie, but one thing that actually worked better for me the second time was Gambit. Because the first time through, I was like, oh, this is a lot of fun. But my initial takeaway was that was fun, but they may have just proven to me why this movie would have been a horrible idea in the first place. Like if he's
Mhm.
too much like the cartoon, it doesn't work in person. And this time I saw more humanity behind those eyes, and I could almost start to imagine a playful take on this character coming back to life. I mean, they certainly go out of their way at the end of this movie to leave the door open to Blade
Hmm.
or Elektra or anyone coming back. We only get the X-23 confirmation,
Hmm.
but they certainly left that door wide open for themselves if they ever want to go down that path.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit. I did have more fun with Channing Tatum this time around. Like the first time I was
Mhm.
full on same as you. Like I was never really into Channing Tatum as Gambit to begin with.
Mhm.
I always thought that was a weird choice. And then when I saw this, it really kind of confirmed to me my worst fears about what a Gambit movie would look like with him. Um, I mean, just in general, like I think his head is just too big for the character. He just feels too
That's
big for the character in general. But beyond
Yeah.
that, and especially with that headgear, like if they ever do a Gambit movie, they should not use that 90s
they
style headgear. It just
cannot
looks
do the
awful.
headgear.
No, no. And but just listening to him talk, and I know he was definitely playing up the accent a lot because it's a Deadpool movie, and I get that, and
Hmm.
it was fun. But yeah, that would be my worry about him trying to play Gambit in an actual Gambit movie. Is just like I feel like he'd take me too much out of it.
Yeah, I'm with you because I don't know if you can do animated Gambit because I know I've said this possibly on a podcast before, but that Gambit is basically like a male version of a Barbie doll in the sense that like he has sort of like impossible sorts of human proportion that
Hmm.
don't work. And like obviously like, Channing Tatum is older than he used to be, but he's still like this handsome fit guy, and for him to look like stocky and off in a costume despite the fact that he's Channing Tatum was weird to me, right? Because it's certainly not a shot at Channing Tatum. It's just what is
Yeah,
this costume?
it
Yeah,
definitely tells you the character design does not work for a real human body, no matter what human body that might be.
and I know people criticize Taylor Kish a lot for not having much of an accent in X-Men
Hmm.
Origins, but I kind of defend them a little bit in that because when you watch the animated series and you see like Channing Tatum do this accent, you would not be able to take that guy seriously if he spoke
No.
like that in a serious movie.
Yeah.
And I think if you're going to do like, Taylor Kish probably took it too far in the opposite direction without having much of an accent. And I really think the sweet spot is something like Josh Holloway as Sawyer on Lost.
Mm, You said it, brother. That is
They-
perfect casting.
Yeah, they missed their chance on that one.
They did,
Yeah.
unfortunately, yeah. And there was a lot of talk about it being a possibility. I remember back in the day. But yeah, that, and I was never a fan of Jennifer Garner as Elektra. Even I like the director's cut of Daredevil, but I still feel like she was just very miscast in that part. And even still, the script didn't really do her a lot of favors either. She's just her character is just very superfluous to the movie as a whole. But still, I thought I've never seen Elektra, so I don't know how to compare that. But from what I've
Right.
heard, it's one of those things where it's I'm better off having not had that basis of comparison. But it was really cool seeing her in there. I actually kind of bought her as Elektra a lot more this time around than I did before.
I think she's convincing in action, right? When you see her
Yes.
going through the motions, she's quite convincing. You can tell she's put in the work in terms of the training. Those moves are native to her body, right? She's not just performing choreography, she knows the martial art. And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I mean, Kris, on Media Lit, we've been revisiting the early 2000s recently. And I
Mhm.
just think of like the portrayal of female characters in the early 2000s in a film. I have not seen Elektra either, but I suspect they probably did not make a lot of the best choices to make that character feel complete and lived in.
No,
It's
but
kind of
but
my
John, I say John Favreau's Foggy Nelson does make a great joke about her name sounding like a Mexican appetizer. Yeah, he
Yes.
really lands that one.
John Favreau is one of the best things about that movie. I mean, that movie's
Yeah.
got a lot of charm to it, especially the director's cut. It's well worth a revisit if you've never given it another chance. But man, that intro for this movie and just I mean, guys, honestly, great opening sequence or greatest opening sequence in a movie ever.
Like it might be greatest because when I watched it on the rewatch, and probably not, everybody calm down, don't write any angry emails. But I was sitting here in my living room without the benefit of a crowd, without the benefit of the dark theater, the big sound, and I was still grinning like a moron as I watched him go through this sequence once again.
There's even a Lego version of it on YouTube. It's
Oh, really?
hilarious. Yeah.
Um, I don't think I can go so far as to call it the greatest intro of all time, but I think it is
Okay, so I
the
think that's enough from
perfect.
Randy. We're gonna kick him out of the Zoom room now.
It's no, it's the perfect intro and the perfect moment because they were right. There was this impossible weight of, the Fox X-Men franchise. Even the people who love it the most would say that it's a mixed bag of success and failure. Um, and I would say the comic book world is pretty universally united in love for Logan. That is amongst my favorite superhero movies of all time. But I know this opening sequence was a success because I thought it was hilarious. I did not find it inoffensive in any way. It acknowledged the greatness of that film and drew just the correct line. It made it clear that we're dipping into a different pool. We've not messed with this story. And we even get to see that impact live on in X-23. So
Mhm.
they somehow managed to skim all the great things about Logan without messing with that movie. And now they've got that on the table. If Marvel cannot find a way to get Daphne Keene into the MCU, they're foolish. I think they got to find a way to make that work. Daphne Keene is so good in that role, and it would be such a great way to give us a Wolverine-esque character without some of the weight of the Wolverine, right? We can keep hitting Hugh Jackman until he's 90.
Right.
Um, but that might be a good way to make it feel fresh.
Oh man, I don't know if Kate Bishop is ready for X-23, but it feels like they've got the Young Avengers cooking, so there's a way.
Yeah, get Yelena over there for girls' night. I'm here for that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that they just come right out, and it felt a lot like the in a similar. I felt like they did it better this time around though. But the fridging of Vanessa in Deadpool 2, how they openly acknowledge it right after they killed her in the opening credits. But even still, like that, and then they corrected at the end of the movie. But even still, that part of it, I feel like they never quite executed that as I get the intent they're trying to do, but it felt like they never quite executed it the way that they wanted it to be read. Whereas this, I think they did it perfectly. They wanted to acknowledge the fact that, yes, we are literally digging up Logan's grave. And
Mm-hmm.
but then to have him still be dead, and then to have the X-23 aspect of it, and they somehow managed to both desecrate and honor Logan at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, as only Deadpool could, right? That's the
Yeah.
magic of this character. And we talked earlier about the way this movie can take the piss out of Marvel Cinematic Universe. It also celebrates it. That's the magic of this character.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the fact that this opening sequence gave us a Deadpool wearing Wolverine claws for a moment was just chef's kiss.
And so many smart little choices too, right? Like you talk about still honoring Logan. Deadpool can't quite handle those claws, right? Like he gets
Yeah.
himself in the leg, I think, when he's trying to figure out how to wield them.
Yeah, he's not cutting
And-
through people the same way Wolverine does by any means.
and then him going to
Not like
Avengers
this.
Tower, and like it is total. This is exactly what Randy was talking about the juvenile humor thing, but the masturbating joke, it gets me. I've seen this movie like 3 times. It gets me every time.
A joke that only Ryan Reynolds could deliver.
Yes. Oh God, yeah. Now this is one of the things this is one of those weird things with this movie, because it's how this connects to the larger MCU, because this is this time travel device, so I don't understand how he's jumping into the MCU here and then he's jumping back, and like some of this stuff does not quite fit together exactly with how we understand how this stuff works in the MCU. And we can forgive a lot of that, admittedly, because it is a Deadpool movie, it is part parody, so there is that aspect of it. But it is still, when I try to think about it, these are the kind of little things that stick out to me.
I agree. I was trying to somehow think, okay, perhaps like there is the sacred timeline that exists. Spoilers for Loki season 1 and 2. There's the sacred timeline that exists. The TVA has been maintaining before Loki and the gang come along and literally blow it all up, right? And so I was trying to think that like that moment that happened where we see Deadpool go into Avengers Tower, maybe that was at a time when he was a part of the sacred timeline, like before but then Loki season 2 happens and everything explodes, and you get the coexistence of multiple variant timelines at once. And I guess that his universe is a branch off, and it's no longer after that point on the sacred timeline. But that's just like me doing backflips and trying to like do the red dot and string on the wall to make it all work, because I don't think the film does a great job of making it clear by any means.
Yeah, you just got to play by Doctor Who rules sometimes.
Wibbly wobbly.
Timey-wimey. Yeah, I mean it's hard for me to get hung up on that. I love Loki, season 1 and season 2, especially season 1. And I don't know what the production timetables were. I don't know how much info they were getting about Loki season 2 and vice versa. I do feel like this movie does not give me a view of the TVA that it really jives with what I saw in Loki, which is a bigger bummer to me than like the timeline itself. I don't really think there's anyone I can blame for that. It was great to see B-15, but at the same time, she seemed to be like much more of like a bureaucrat than the B-15 I thought I knew in Loki. So some of that stuff was slightly rubbing me the wrong way. But you're merging all these, Fox and Marvel properties, and there's going to be messiness. There's going to be infighting and lack of information. So, and the character of Paradox does a pretty good job creating this little pocket universe of the TVA, where like in this little splinter cell of the TVA. So I can attribute some of the vibes that didn't fit to that.
I will say it was great seeing Matthew McFadden as Paradox. I thought he he perfectly plays this bureaucrat gone mad with power.
Perfectly sniveling, perfectly dishonest and conniving.
Yeah, he was my
But sorry,
he
go
was
ahead.
my most improved player on the rewatch because I wasn't so focused on waiting for the next big cameo. But yeah, that when he actually kind of does his best Deadpool impersonation and tries to play off Deadpool and Wolverine as heroes at the end, only for them to walk down the hallway and he's just like, "Fuck." That disingenuousness to the pure raw honesty. It's really compelling and fun and funny.
Now, along those lines, like with the whole anchor being debate, that because I've seen this become, and this isn't something that I really necessarily care about, but I've seen this come up a lot on social media, on message boards and stuff like that. So I figure it's something worth talking about. Did you guys have any sort of thought about like the 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 logistics of the anchor being, like how well that concept works with what we know about the multiverse so far? Do you guys have any ideas about that?
Look, I know that we have the existing concept of the nexus being, right? Certain beings around whom things like are fixed. They're fixed points in time or history. They always exist in a given variation of the universe. There's certain immutable qualities about those characters. So the Marvel universe already contains some idea that there are certain characters that are just simply more significant to the fabric of that reality than other characters. I don't know that this film does a really good job of fleshing that out in a way that allows the audience to understand it or embrace it as a concept. It's just a thing they tell you, right? They tell you that, well, there's just a being that once they're gone, the universe can't continue. But they don't really explain why, the what of that, the how of it. That being said, when the movie wraps, and it seems to me that somehow, despite the fact that you cannot, quote unquote, replace an anchor being, that something that Deadpool did with Wolverine made them together, anchor beings for this universe again, and thereby saving it. It worked for me. There was so much heart in that last moment for them. There was so much joy for me in watching those characters build the bond they built over the course of the film, that like that bond and my belief in it helped to justify the idea of the anchor being in its validity.
I think this is a head canon only sort of solution that you can come up with, but my best head canon here is the TVA is very recently restructured. They've been culling this sacred timeline, and they're kind of making up the rules and operating on faulty logic. And presumably, Paradox has been given the revelation, spoilers for Loki, that if he is an agent of the TVA, it means he has been ripped out of a previous life as a human being in a timeline. And I guess he's having a hard time letting go. He's clutching to this power he feels as a TVA agent in some way. He wants to believe anchor beings work a certain way. He doesn't want to let go of those rules. And like kind of like if I pair that with what Kris said, maybe we're learning that universes are going to sustain themselves. But of course, you got all those millions of years of evolution and whatnot. So what was sustaining us then? Who's to say?
Well, there's what here are the kind of like the two headcanony ways I work it out. Is one thing is first off, I mean, time doesn't necessarily operate. We think of time as linear, but it doesn't necessarily operate that way,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just our perception of time. So an anchor being can be sustained through like multiple points in times, and who's to say that there is not more than one anchor being over time? Maybe this is just what happens when an anchor being dies and there's no other anchor being to take their place, because he does say that it takes thousands of years for a universe to unravel. So maybe that's the thing. Maybe in those thousands of years, if another anchor being pops up, the ship kind of rights itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And another thing to think of too is the only person who ever talks about the anchor beings, the only authority we get on this is Paradox, and we can't really trust the guy. So there's who's to
yep.
say that he's telling the truth? He could be making this shit up just as a way to get Wade to agree to his plan.
You're right. B-15 just says, whatever you did here today, somehow it saved your universe. But she doesn't say anything about anchor beings, to your point. We only really ever hear Paradox utter those words.
Yeah, he's using an outdated textbook, outdated
Yeah.
TVA handbook.
Yeah, an old handbook, right?
Although
Now how sorry, go ahead.
Well, Perry, you just got me thinking, like the first iteration that you suggested, this world we see in Logan is pretty barren and destroyed. And I believe, are we not led to believe all the X-Men just about are dead except for Logan and Professor Xavier? It's been a minute since I watched that movie.
That's what Logan establishes, that basically it doesn't come directly out and say it, but basically Professor X, had one of his mental episodes and killed all the X-Men.
But perhaps that could be perhaps that could be the reason why there's no anchor being to take hold, right? Like we've hit some kind of Armageddon-y sort of situation, and our quote unquote worst Logan from this film is also coming from a timeline where all of the X-Men are dead under different circumstances. But yeah, I love that. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Now, I do want to talk about the little Logan montage we get here, because this is just one of those pure fan service gold moments, because every single Logan that pops up is a different version of Wolverine from the comics. We get the short, hairy, comics accurate Logan. We get the Age of Apocalypse. We get Patch. We get Old Man Logan, or possibly General Howlett. It's not really clear which one he is. We get the brown suit one. We get the being sacrificed on the X Cross from the Australian Outback era, and of course we get the Cavalrine. Any particular standouts for you guys within that montage there?
As a comics book newbie, I would love to learn a little bit about that sacrifice on the Giant X, because I've not read a ton of the comics. And just from listening to podcasts and things like that, I was aware of a lot of these other iterations of the Wolverine, but that one I knew nothing about. It was visually compelling, and I was like, I want to know this story. I'm gonna have to find that comic.
When it's so visually iconic,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that was a standout for me as well, just visually iconic. And I want to say the Cavalrine, but actually for me, I was much more tickled and entertained by comics accurate, short King Wolverine. That was perfect. I mean, it didn't look good, and it wasn't supposed to look good. I loved that quick nod to the fans who think that would be a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the quick moment to prove them wrong. Really fun.
That mainly worked for me just from years of one of my favorite podcasters, Dave Gonzalez, always bringing up the fact that Wolverine was supposed to be short and hairy and smelly. So
if you want to get a good version of Wolverine, see like how he is actually accurately drawn, take a look at Derek Robertson's run on the character, because he drew him as short, hairy, and ugly, and that's exactly what he's supposed to be like. But Randy, you want to check out the Outback era of the X-Men comics.
Okay.
And so I think that starts off right at the end of Fall of the Mutants. And so that's like around Uncanny X-Men 228, 229. And it goes up until 230-ish or something along theirs, or maybe up as like 250-ish. But yeah, it's somewhere in there. It's at the end of the Outback era is when he gets attacked by the Reavers, led by Donald Pierce and Lady Deathstrike. And all the other X-Men are gone at this point. They've all gone through the Siege Perilous, and they've been transported to different parts of the world. And he's the only one left, and he is being sacrificed in this giant X. And I think it was a Jin Lee cover, actually. Like might have been his first cover. And this is the first time he meets Jubilee, because she's the only one left, and she basically saves him. So
nice.
Great run. It's like one of the best periods of the X-Men comics. Definitely look that up, the Outback era. It's wonderful stuff. But for me, I think I loved seeing Patch in there. I thought Patch was awesome. I loved those early issues of Wolverine solo series when he's in the white suit and the eye patch, and he's running this. It's basically like Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, except in Madripoor, and it's a little weird going back and reading that because it is also kind of ridiculous because the whole idea is that he's supposed to be in hiding because the X-Men are presumed dead by the world. And so his way of hiding is just wearing an eye patch. And everybody just, and you can tell like the Chris Claremont was writing those early issues and he actually believed this worked. But then later on, Peter David came in and did an arc in it, and everybody says, "Oh, can we stop pretending you're not Wolverine now?" It's like, how come you guys? Why didn't you guys tell me? They're like, "Well, you're known for being this, for killing people who when you get angry. So nobody wanted to piss you off, so we just played along."
That's classic.
But the big thing in that montage that really got my gears turning was the brown suit. And here's my most controversial Wolverine opinion that is going to get me tarred and feathered, but I do not like the yellow costume. I do not like the mask. Like brown suit, no mask, that is perfect for me.
I didn't like the mask as much as I thought I would. The white, and as a Batman fan, this was kind of disconcerting to me to realize that like the white out eyes don't really work. There was something that always looked like I was like, is it fully animated? I couldn't tell what was happening with his face. It was kind of uncanny valley the whole time. It never really worked for me as much as I wanted it to. I wanted to be with Deadpool when he pulled it up, and it's like, oh my goodness, it's not as cool as you want it to be.
Yeah, I think they could have kept it to the big fight sequence and then moved on.
Yeah, when they kept it on after the fight sequence, that's when it really got distracting.
Yeah.
Like it was cool in the moment. I totally admit to, even though I don't like the mask in the comics, that moment when he pulls it up, I still got giddy about that. It was still pretty cool to see.
By the time he's just shirtless with the mask on, it's silly.
Yeah.
And luckily, the script was there to tell me how iconic that brown suit was, and it did look quite classy. I dug it. The little reflection from the Hulk and the claws was a nice touch as well.
Yeah, that's an action figure that I remember as a kid. Brown suit Wolverine.
Yep, that was the one I had. That was the first one.
I was gonna say.
But also the other cameos like Chris Evans popping up. Like I was right there with Deadpool. At first, I legitimately thought it was Captain America, and then when he's like, "Oh, he's gonna say it," and then he says "Flame on," and I'm like, "Yes! Oh God, it's not what I expected, but I love it."
Yeah, I have to apologize for liking those Fantastic Four movies when they came out. I was young. I had never read a Fantastic Four comic book, and they were just like fun, like MTV era comic book movies. They're a little bit tough to rewatch now, but I never for a moment doubted that was my boy Johnny Storm right there on screen when he came out. Only because, so like when you look at the blue sleeves, it's a closer skin tight fit. It's no version of Cap that we've ever seen on screen or even in the comics. Usually he's got those corny gloves in the comics too. And so like, there's something about like the close fit of the blue sleeve that you can see there's like some piping on it. I was like, and this is a version of Deadpool, right? I kind of never doubted that it was going to be Johnny Storm. So when he yelled "Flame on," it was kind of like I knew it moment for me, and I was hyped.
But honestly, don't apologize for liking those Fantastic Four movies. They're not completely worthless. Like there's definitely mistakes made in them, but there's a lot of good stuff in them. I think especially the second one had a lot of good stuff in it. I think the second one especially is when they really nailed down the quartet, those four characters. The story around it, not so much, but those four characters, I felt especially in the second one, they really nailed them. And, just Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis in both of them, they were completely on point.
Yes, their chemistry was tremendous. They were a ton of fun together.
Yeah. Again, due to my lack of comics street cred, I too was taken in, but pleasantly surprised because I was aware of Chris Evans having played this other role. Now, I was reluctant earlier to say that the opening sequence of this film was the best opening sequence ever, but I'm very willing to say that our stinger here featuring Chris Evans is easily the best stinger in a Marvel property across all of them. I'm happy to
embracing
say that. Yeah.
embracing his Boston accent, and embracing his best New England guy, which I love to see.
That was great. Like I was not expecting that, especially not expecting that. Because this
Yeah.
running gag, I love that there's this running gag throughout the entire movie where keeps trying to fervently deny that he had
Mhm.
anything to do with Johnny's death. And then finally let's go to the tape. And you just have Chris Evans going on this tirade. It was brilliant.
Yeah, really
Yeah,
good.
it's the outlier. It's the one time Deadpool is not lying,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps in
Right.
his entire existence. And it's, yeah, beautiful stuff. And the subversion of Captain America.
Yeah, yeah. What did you guys think of the cavalry though?
I mean, he looked fantastic, but it was like it's too much. It's too much, man.
Mhm.
He's too big. The mutton chops were too exaggerated.
Yeah.
Maybe if they really did it, they wouldn't make it so absurd. But like literally chomping the cigar, the big mutton chops. It was like a cartoon on screen.
Yeah, you know what? It was the absolute perfect example of fan service.
Mhm.
Folks who have been clamoring for the Cavalrine were picturing exactly that. And I
Hmm.
bet it was fucking awesome for them. It's kind of like getting John Krasinski as Reed Richards in a cameo.
Mm.
It's like, there you go, here's your
Yeah.
fan cast. And I think it probably was exactly what those people wanted from that fan casting. It's not the fan casting I wanted personally, but you know, he worked in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, it
But I,
looked like a Boss Logic mock-up
yeah.
Mhm.
on live action.
Well, I do think this also kind of proves that with both the John Krasinski one and this one, I think this is also kind of Marvel saying like, here's what you want. Do you see now why it's not going to work?
Yeah,
And
what a
I did
blessing
feel that
Deadpool
like,
is to them.
yes, yeah. Um, I don't know though. I keep going back. There is one fan casting for Wolverine though that I keep popping up and keeps making me think about, and that is Daniel Radcliffe. I mean, it just
Mhm.
Dude, I was hoping that's what you would say. I've seen the one image, right? That kind of sparked this whole thing, the feral Daniel Radcliffe
Mhm.
image. He's shirtless and he's ripped and he's hairy and he's screaming. Let's do
I
it.
mean, he's a short, scruffy guy. I mean, it looks like it could work. And
He's
um,
got pathos. He's
yeah,
got damage behind those eyes.
Yeah,
oh yeah, definitely.
he's carved out this cool sort of quirky career, and he could bring something really special to the part for sure. I'd be
Mhm.
curious to see that movie.
Now, but at the Sabretooth fight, like this was actually kind of a disappointment for me. Um, I did think it was interesting they went with Tyler Mane instead of Liev Schreiber, especially because after rewatching, Origins, like Liev Schreiber was one of the few bright spots of
Yeah.
that movie. And on the other hand, like if you're gonna have a big knockdown drag out fight, like one of the criticisms I have about Schreiber in that movie is I feel like Sabretooth needs to be significantly more physically imposing than Wolverine,
Mhm.
and Schreiber just is not. He's very good at playing like this, the other aspects of Sabretooth, but as far as like just being physically imposing, doesn't really have it. So if you're just gonna have a fight between them, then I can see why you'd go with Tyler Mane. But then what we got, honestly, this was kind of a disappointment for me, how it's just like it's over really quick.
Yeah, and I can only wonder if maybe Liev Schreiber didn't want to come back for that, right? If this was always the gimmick, maybe it was like, well, I'm not coming back to just get my head chopped off in a split second.
That was kind of like with Michael Rosenbaum and Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like he was asked to
Hmm.
come back and he said like what they wanted me to do, I didn't feel it did justice to the character. So I can understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, now again, I keep bringing up my lack of comics chops here. Is this just being like a fan fight that people really wanted? If you don't have the personalities of those characters in mind, it does on its face sound kind of stupid for someone who's
Mm-hmm.
ignorant to the full storyline, right? So that joke worked on me okay. Chris and I once did a whole podcast on Equilibrium, so we both love the quick work surprise kill when you've been promised a big fight scene. That can be a lot of fun.
Right.
So since the stakes were so low for me, I loved it. But if I go read a bunch of runs of comics that help me understand why people want to see that showdown, I'm sure it would quickly start to become a disappointment because you would know the humanity behind it.
I'll say
See,
this: if there was,
no, you
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Perry.
You go ahead, Chris. Finish your thought.
Was it if there was a version of this movie that was a little bit pick your own adventure, where it was like I could choose
Hmm.
which fights I had to sit there and watch play out as real fights, and which ones can just have the quick kill gimmick. This might be one that I choose to watch the full fight
Mm-hmm.
because it's Sabretooth and Wolverine.
And it's because I think it's also because we haven't really gotten a good fight with the two of them in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the one in X-Men wasn't that impressive. The one in X-Men Origins also not that impressive of a showdown. And so, and I think I would have been fine with it, I think. But one of the things that kind of grinds my gears about it is how hyped up it was in the marketing. Like they released a specific trailer of just the lead
Mhm.
up to that fight. And I'm just like, you're gonna tease me like that, and then you're gonna, pull this. Like if it just popped up and it was just like a quick thing, I was not expecting it, I'd be fine with it. But the
Mm-hmm.
way it was teased is really kind of it. They set my expectations too high for that.
Yeah, which again, maybe if any movie gets away with it, it is Deadpool because that's like
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
setting you up and creating those expectations just to not meet them does feel like the dick move Deadpool would pull. You know, other movies that's unforgivable to put something in a trailer like that, right? To like bait and
Yeah.
switch it would be unforgivable. But Deadpool can get away with it.
Mm-hmm. What about Logan's whole Deadpool rant? Like when they're in the car there and he's just going off on him for like a good, few minutes there. I mean, honestly, I thought that was like some really great performance on Jackman's part in that sequence.
Yeah, the that whole Honda Odyssey sequence is probably my favorite scene in the movie. Like I've got my notes here, and there was this one section of my notes that I put in bold-faced text because I didn't want to miss it. And it was that whole section, that whole scene. Um, no wonder they didn't take you. You are a ridiculous, immature, half-wit moron. I have never met a sadder, more attention-starved, jabbering little prick in my entire life, and that says a lot because I've been alive for more than 200 fucking years. That was one hell of a dismantling of Deadpool. And I love a superhero story when I get to know the psychology of that superhero. And I think Logan had Deadpool dead to rights in that moment.
Yeah, it's a brutal takedown, but nothing he says is inaccurate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, Perry, Hugh Jackman delivers it perfectly. You know, there's like this passion, this anger and frustration. You can tell he's reaching for the meanest things that he could possibly say. You could tell it's present in the character performance that he's trying to be mean and but he's also being truthful. You can tell he's pouring out from a very real thing that he's experienced in the very short time he's known this character. And the reason it all works so perfectly is because on top of that great performance, the film makes a smart choice to give Deadpool like the rare moment where he doesn't have anything clever to say back. Like
Mm-hmm.
Deadpool is actually hurt. You can see it in Ryan Reynolds' physical performance behind the mask and in the suit. He's still for a second. His head barely tilts. There's not as much of a lilt to his voice when he just says, "I'm going to fight you now."
Yeah.
Like it's violence is the only answer. He's so genuinely hurt.
Like, I still wish they had given Vanessa a character in this film, but if I want to give a more generous reading to the way they handled Vanessa in the movie, it would be that she never dumps Wade. She's not looking for a grand gesture. It's a pure self-fulfilling prophecy moment where he is feeling down on himself. He's feeling maybe attention starved. He's not seeing the type of attention that he wants, and he begs her to break up with him. That's such a common movie trope, and he can't see it. So I wish we had had some more on-screen time with Vanessa, but he invented something in his mind that he had to do for her, and that's part of his problem. He
Mm-hmm.
couldn't be vulnerable.
Well, and also too, this sequence touches on one of those things that I think too often, a lot of fans and even a lot of writers too often forget about Deadpool is the fact that the reason why he uses all this humor all the time is because he is a severely broken individual. And he does have massive inferiority complexes. And so one of the things that works so well is like, yeah, not only is everything uh Wolverine saying to Deadpool in that moment true, like you said, but it's also stuff that Wade knows. And it's the stuff that he tries to deny to himself. It's stuff that he's always thinking about. And for someone to, and Logan is the only one who ever says this to his face. Everyone else in his life is trying to placate him. They're trying to make him feel better of it. But every single thing that Logan says is 100% true, and Wade knows it's all true, and he's been trying to deny this the whole time. So, and there are these little tiny moments Reynolds gets in each of these movies where he gets a chance to reflect on that deeper insecurity. I think the fact that Reynolds himself has said that he suffers from anxiety and is one of the reasons why I think he's able to find this connection to the character, because it's obvious he knows the comics. And I think that you go back and you read like the Joe Kelly run, and this comes through very well in several issues of that series. And he plays it so, you know, even with the VFX mask and everything, like it's just like his movements, the subtle eye movements and everything, the subtle body language, it is just so spot on. You can tell that not only do you hear Logan twisting in the knife, but you can see it in Wade's face that he feels that knife being twisted. And then for him to just, you know, just pause for a beat, and then when Logan's just shouting at him, you got nothing to say, mouth, and then Wade just, you know, very calmly says, I'm gonna fight you now. Like, and then that's what makes that fight so good, because, you know, one of the things I loved about Civil War, for example, is the fact that you get the big ass superhero fight scene out in the middle of the movie. And then so by the time you get to the end of the movie, it's this very personal knockdown, drag out fight between those three characters, which is why that movie works. The ending of that movie is one of the strongest in the MCU, I think. Whereas compared to something like Shang-Chi, for example, which I loved, but that father-son fight, which should be like the pinnacle, something we've been waiting for this whole movie, it's overshadowed by these CGI dragons flying around and this big ass battle scene that's flying around. So this movie very smartly has that fight. And that's why I think, Randy, I think you're right. That is like the best scene in the movie, because this is the point where each character is fully tapping into their own insecurities. And you're really seeing their character hangups, their faults, all of that come right out to the violent four.
Yeah, Harry, I love that you brought up like Ryan Reynolds, the human being, and his personal history, his emotional, mental health things he's dealt with. You know, I evoked my day job of being a high school English teacher. I'm in my 18th year, and when I see Ryan Reynolds in anything, not just as Deadpool, there's this look in his face, this way he holds his face and his eyes that I've seen, you know, 100 times in a student who like has to act out a little bit because there is something internal going on. There's some sort of distraction. There's some sort of frustration. It's not someone, you know, trying to be cruel. It's not someone trying to be a problem. It's a human being who's trying to work something out. And there's this, I can't put it into words, but like I look at Ryan Reynolds and he can melt away into like a teenage form. Like I can see who that kid was. I can imagine him in my classroom so easily. And he has it quite often, that little troublemaker look, but there's something more behind it.
Kris, do you have anything else you wanted to mention about that part?
Well, I was just gonna say that it's paid off to an extent, the arc that he is on, specifically in what like Wolverine brings out of him in terms of this vulnerability and this self-reflection. So he resists it there in that moment, but and maybe it's just a throwaway funny line, but later in the movie, Deadpool will deflect with some humor and then instantly call himself on it when Wolverine pulls on that dope mask. And Deadpool's amazed by it, then he immediately calls them blowjob handles. And then he's like, I'm sorry, I'm just a catty bitch when I'm jealous. He like immediately kind of calls himself on, like, I said that thing, but I didn't mean that thing. I said that thing because I feel the opposite. I think you look wicked cool right now, man. And I love that there's something about this relationship that allows him to both be himself and know himself in that way.
Mhm.
One of the best moments of cinematography might just be the moment after Wolverine's shirt pops off and they have Deadpool kind of like look over at the abs from the
Yeah.
background.
Yeah.
Is another one of those moments.
Yeah, it's like
So
ab mounds in the foreground and Deadpool in the background.
Yes.
that actually brings up another point, because I'd seen this criticism too about the movie pop up, is the homoerotic jokes in it. And there are two different ways to read it. I've seen some people say that they were offensive. It recalled back, like, feelings of like 90s humor where they were making jokes at, LGBTQ expense. But the thing that kept bringing me back to it is like, well, in the comics, Deadpool is canonically pansexual. So this is
Exactly.
not him making a gay joke. This is what he's being serious about this stuff here.
I completely agree. And that's what I was getting at earlier, I think, when it comes to like sort of knowing the character of Ryan Reynolds or knowing the character of Deadpool, that should build up trust, right? Because I think there's room in strangeness to be offended, right? Out in the world without context, without knowing a person, there's room to be offended. James Gunn was completely canceled. James Gunn was fired from the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise because he said some horrifying things in text, right? Like there were tweets that to read them raw. But then what happened was everybody who knows him came out and spoke to his character. Everybody who knows him came out and spoke to the context of those things. Everybody who knows him was able to validate the ultimate, like the person behind those words. Not to say that if you were offended by them, that's invalid, but here's why I can tell you he didn't mean to hurt your feelings when he said it, or he didn't mean it the way you took it. And when there's enough of that out there, you hope there's grace. And so, to your point, Perry, the character of Deadpool is a completely sex positive, pansexual character. This franchise has been sex positive from the jump. Like, we know when Deadpool talks about pegging, it's not hypothetical. It's text. It's on screen, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think sure you can be offended if you were. That's your experience, but I don't think that that is a good faith reading of the character or the creators here.
Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't say it's. Oh, sorry, Randy, you go ahead first.
I was just gonna say it's such an intent versus impact situation where there's
Hmm.
not really a wrong reading. It has a
Right.
lot to do with who this is made for. Like Perry, you mentioned 90s humor. Like I'll admit I'm a fan of the show Friends. I watch it quite a bit. I got into it because my wife loved it, and it's a comfort show for me. And I'm not always happy with it because there are tons of jokes where the punchline is like, someone might think I'm gay. That would be bad. And
Hmm.
that's there and it's frustrating, which is true, especially so many years later where so many of us have learned so much. On the flip side, even though I hate that that's so often the punchline, seeing like Chandler and Joey be vulnerable with each other, want to hug each other, and learning to be comfortable with that is good. Like a next step in that iteration for me would be like Turk and JD on
Mhm.
Scrubs,
I was
which
exactly
is
going to mention that.
yeah, it's another one of those relationships that's like so beautiful and fun. And me like the white male straight dude watching those shows, I think I got more positive than negative out of those moments because I was not repeating the worst behaviors. Uh, but I can sit here on a podcast and I've got no problem telling Kris I love him. I love you, man. Right? It's
Love you too,
partly
buddy.
because of
Yeah.
this, but it's also not wrong. Like if I am like a teenager who is gay and I go to see Deadpool and Wolverine with a bunch of friends and I go with the wrong people and I don't like the way someone laughed at Deadpool making a joke about, you know, having sex with a bunch of TVA guys who came to arrest him or whatever. It could have that negative impact, right? So it's like all these things can be true at
Mhm.
once and figuring out how that conversation works is part of it. So I think some of those jokes work better for me than others. Like the moments with Wolverine definitely don't bother me at all. Because there's this real love developing between them.
Well, so it and the thing what I was thinking too, which is why I was going to say that I don't think it's completely, it's not an it's not an absurd reading of these moments
Mm-hmm.
because to like we know this because we do know Deadpool from these other things, so we know more about the character. So we do know that he is pansexual, but
Yep.
in defense of the people who were offended by those things, the movies don't always do the best job of showing that side of Deadpool. Like in the first two movies,
Mm-hmm.
he's completely committed to this relationship with a woman. So it's completely understandable why people wouldn't get the pansexual aspect of his character because that relationship is such a focus of especially those first two movies and to a lesser extent this movie as well.
Mm.
Totally fair.
Yeah, so I can understand that people who didn't quite pick up on that, and that is something where it's the other movies should have done a better job of showing this side of the character. Like I've seen this
Mm-hmm.
meme floating around where people say like the X-Men's about civil rights. If you didn't get that, you didn't get the X-Men. And they said Deadpool is pansexual. If you didn't get that, you didn't get that. Well, I think that's an unfair judgment because they haven't always done a good job of consistently portraying Deadpool as a pansexual character. So it's very easy to see him and Ryan Reynolds in these movies and think, oh yeah, it's just a straight guy. So I totally understand that offense. Anyway, any other I made a note here, just the Van Milder joke.
A plus.
Yeah,
Perfect,
fantastic.
perfect. But also the whole multiverse criticism, right? When Deadpool is like, the multiverse, it's had some. Let's just move on. I thought that was a nice way of just kind of like poking fun at what Marvel's been trying to do and how they've tried to kind of course correct and stuff like that in the wake of some movies that weren't so well received.
Yeah, it's just been miss after miss after miss, he says. And it's not that I think they're done with any form of multiversal storytelling, but to your point, Randy, you made earlier, this film does a great job of just leaving things open, of
Mm-hmm.
poking fun and acknowledging what maybe hasn't worked, of acknowledging that there's probably room to pivot, but it doesn't tell you what's next. It doesn't tell you they'll never do multiverse again, right? We don't see some sort of collapsing of the sacred timeline or of the multiverse again into one sacred timeline at the end of this movie or anything like that. If anything, this film allows for the idea that this one variant universe is at least is now thriving and going to continue on. So I love that they're able to poke at it, acknowledge what hasn't been great, um, and not close the book on it either.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Similar to, I mean, I guess maybe now in hindsight we know that when Wesley Snipes said that he would be the only Blade, he was right. But other than that,
Oh
I don't
no,
think
I
they're
mean,
really
hey, hey,
closing the
hey,
doors.
justice for sticky fingers.
Wow. Wow.
That's a deep cut.
Yeah, that's a deep cut.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with it to the point that like you can't separate corporate Marvel from storytelling Marvel. Disney's been buying up everything under the sun. It's all there in the foreground. You've got all these powerful people trying to make a name for themselves, and sometimes it gets in the way of art. I try not to be like some podcast dude who does not work in the industry throwing hot takes out there, but I'm going to do it once. And I am like so annoyed that it took several years and millions of dollars for like a genius executive to be like, oh, wait, what if we brought back Daredevil in a form similar to what it was with the story that everybody loved, right? Like, I'm one of the rare people who I do not think it was perfect all the way through, but I loved the idea of Agents of Shield as part of Marvel. And when they were allowing it to be a genuine part of the story and bringing in real players from the real storyline, it really worked for me. but through more like corporate infighting amongst different branches of the business, right? It got pushed to the periphery. Okay, you can play in this sandbox over here. We're gonna kick some sand on you, and I think we're feeling some of that in the bigger MCU. There's too much business in the way of like telling a good story sometimes.
No, I think that's perfect, and I think Agents of Shield is a good thing to mention there, because I felt the same thing. Like, Agents of Shield is a show that this concept had such potential to explore these aspects of the MCU that are probably not going to get the focus in movies, and so this is a good place to go into it. And it never quite lived up to that promise, in large part too, like you said, because of that corporate infighting, because it was pushed off to the peripheries. And yeah, that was kind of disappointing, especially when the MCU basically, Josh Whedon basically cut the show's legs out from under with the show he created when he decided, oh yeah, we're not going to have Shield anymore. So that all kind of, that was difficult to watch, because I was really interested in that show, especially in those early seasons, for that reason. All right, what do you guys think about so we talked a little bit here about the ending. So this is one of the biggest criticisms I have, is that this movie has been touted as the thing that's going to bring Deadpool into the MCU proper, but it doesn't. Like, I don't know, because he goes back to his own universe. So I feel like I don't really know. I mean, on the one hand, if this movie was just going to be a send off to the Fox universe, which we get in that great, montage over the credits, which surprisingly I got a bit choked up over, even though I've had all these criticisms of these movies. It did kind of feel like, the end of high school, where it's like, yeah, there was a lot of annoying shit here, but there were some good memories too. And right down to the Good Riddance song is a perfect example of that, right? It's this song that feels very, emotional and all that, but the title is Good Riddance. I'm glad this is over.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it just feels like, and if they were going to bill it just as this is a send off for the Fox stuff, okay, I'd be fine with it. But the fact that it's still billed as this is Deadpool's introduction to the MCU, it feels like they forgot to do something.
I'm trying now to remember how it was actually marketed, because now, as is the case often with fandom spaces today, I can't remember what they told us and what we told ourselves.
That's a fair point.
I honestly can't. I don't know. So I'm not sure that they ever promised us that this was bringing him into the MCU proper, if that was sort of an assumption that we made. I know I thought this was going to do more to definitively at least comment on mutants as it relates to the MCU. So regardless of whether or not we told ourselves or they told us, I can say definitively this movie does not leave me in a place where I understand how either Deadpool or mutants relate to the core MCU universe proper.
Yeah, I mean, everything I've read makes it clear that we're landing on some sort of a Secret Wars situation. Yet another comic run I haven't read, but my layperson's understanding of it is that people from many different timelines and or dimensions get sucked into the same space. So like they've left the door open. They've given themselves tools to bring X-Men into this world. We've got Maria Rambeau off in an X-Men existence. We've got the TVA as a potential branch point. We've got the Void itself. We've now established we can access that with or without the TVA. We've got our sling rings. Marvel Sparkle Circle.
Brilliant. So good.
So like they opened the door. They kicked it open, and we do have that little Thor tease. Why is Thor crying? So they don't
Great
have to
call.
pay that off, but they can down the road. I think they have to personally, but
well, especially because they don't just show you once. He brings it up a couple of times, even at the end when he's with Paradox again. He's like, I need to know Thor was crying. And so I was going to bring that up too, Randy, because it's almost, you could almost joke that like, no, they did bring Deadpool into the MCU. You saw him there with Thor. There was that moment on the screen. So yeah, I think to your point, Randy, they left some doors open.
I mean, my whole thing about I've always been against the idea of using the multiverse to bring in the mutants into the MCU because I think that it makes it a little bit too convoluted. I think it's much easier to say that, these Infinity Stones, they triggered Wanda and Pietro's powers, and with all these snaps that happened on Earth, it jump-started evolution. And so people whose grandkids would have become mutants are now becoming mutants. I think that would have been an easy way to explain it and would have left the door open because we had Namor saying that he was a mutant already and he's been around for a while. So you could say there have been small numbers of mutants. Maybe you had Krakoa there and Xavier and Magneto gathering them together, and now it's all falling apart because there's such an explosion of the mutant population. I think that would work. It would also explain why mutants are feared and hated, because it's reminding people of the blip. So you can tie it into that. I think that would be a nice, easier way to do it than to bring in multiverse. But now when we got Robert Downey Jr. coming in as Doctor Doom, now I am thinking that Secret Wars is going to be kind of a reset. And this is going to get them to do like kind of a soft reboot where they're going to get to, reset the deck chairs and so on and so forth. And so we'll see how that plays out. I'm not really sure one way or the other how this is going to all work together, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, what B-15 says very vaguely that she doesn't think either Wolverine or Deadpool are done yet. Whatever that means.
So that pretty much exhausts my notes. Were there any other things that we didn't talk about that you guys wanted to mention?
I have just one, and that is Emma Corrin as Cassandra Nova was just such a force. I loved this character. I found her wildly compelling. I found her terrifying. The fact that we got to see her start this almost sort of emotional seduction of Logan in the sense that she was offering him the silence he was seeking. I would have been curious to see how that conversation played out. The fact that she showed some grace and mercy to Deadpool and Wolverine, it was a little bit of a bummer to see her just become like, I'm gonna burn it all down in the final moment. But I did land on a kind read of it on my rewatch where I was like, Deadpool and Wolverine came through their pain with partnership, and they are linking hands with the matter and the antimatter. Cassandra Nova is trying to do it alone, and they overpower her. Could be like a simple way to just land this idea of like friendship, connection. Peter being the one who brings peace multiple times at the end of this film because he's just such a good bud.
Kris,
Yeah,
how about you?
I can totally validate that statement. I think she was brilliant. The visual device of her fingers going into the mind, right? So she can say that.
She doesn't wash that hands.
Oh my goodness gracious, is that gross? When she's dragging Paradox around, right? So her hand is in his head. She's not touching him any other way, and she's dragging him down to go see the Time Ripper, which suggests that like her hands can go through the head, and she's feeling you, but she's not in there, but she can also still tangibly hold you that way and carry you. The whole thing gave me the shivers throughout, and it wouldn't have all worked so well if she wasn't so darn scary herself. Those eyes were just, you couldn't look away, but you were so scared.
I promise I'll kill you immediately.
I don't know if you guys read Grant Morrison's new X-Men comic run, but that the whole thing about putting her fingers in a person's head, that comes from just like a few panels of that first story arc that Grant Morrison did with Frank Whiteley, which introduced Cassandra Nova. Wonderful run altogether, but especially that. And it's so cool that it's just like this one little moment. This is this one thing that she's only done once in the comics. They make it such a integral part of her character in this movie, and they use it, and she was using it for a very specific purpose there. She was using it to copy someone's DNA, but here they're using it as like a way of her, that's like how she executes her psychic powers, which I thought was a really cool read on that, because it shows it being a much more invasive process than like any other telepath we've seen before.
Yeah, wild. That's cool to know that it comes from those comic book panels.
Mhm.
I think the only other thing I wanted to highlight just really quick is just to celebrate something about this franchise as maybe it has wrapped up now, even if Deadpool hasn't, that I just makes me feel so happy for the folks involved, right? Knowing that Ryan Reynolds wanted this so badly, right? Like when, to your point, Perry, those little cut scenes, the behind the scenes stuff from the old movies are kind of emotional at the end. You feel for it. And when Ryan Reynolds talks about the affinity he has for this character, how he relates to the character in comic books, and boy, that's somebody I'd love to play someday. And he's sitting there about to play that terrible version of it.
Mm.
It's just like heartwarming to know that things can go this way in the world, and that there's a certain amount of like serendipity to it all, right down to the idea that Blake Lively is standing there portraying Lady Deadpool. And Randy, I'm not sure if you know the story. Way back when Rob Liefeld created Lady Deadpool, her very character design was inspired by Blake Lively on Gossip Girl. Long before she was associated with Ryan Reynolds, long before
Mhm.
Ryan Reynolds was associated with Deadpool. And yet
Mhm.
here we all are somehow living in a world where Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively are married, and he's Deadpool, and she gets to step into the role of Lady Deadpool on screen. It all just feels so purposed in a delightful way that makes me love being a nerd.
So you're saying that maybe like the corporate entities should listen to creative people instead of making Ryan Reynolds fight every time he makes another money-making movie?
I would not go so far as to suggest something insane as that, Randy, but perhaps the creatives might have an idea or two worth listening to.
Mm, I think we there's a fine line too. I caution people against listening too closely to Rob Liefeld.
Yes, perhaps not our favorite example, right?
Because I do think one of the things about Deadpool is that Rob Liefeld always likes to take credit for making creating this character that became
Mhm.
so popular, and I really think not enough credit is given to the actual writers who followed him and made the character actually something that people wanted to read about. So
Mhm.
I think far more credit is due to people like Joe Kelly and Fabian Nicieza and Gail Simone and these writers who really took this character that was basically just a Deathstroke knockoff and made
Mhm.
him something that a character who has pathos, like Kris, like you've been saying, who has pain behind his eyes, right? You can see
Mhm.
that, and
Hmm.
that's what made this character interesting to Ryan Reynolds. It wasn't him, you know, teleporting in and fighting X-Force. It was the character work that these other writers did. So I think a lot of credit needs to be given to
Yeah.
those writers to making this character really what he is.
Tale as old as time, right?
Yeah.
It makes me think of Kane and Finger, you know?
Mhm.
Oh, apparently, and one other thing I just want to quickly mention. It looks like Downey was actually about very close to coming back in this movie, and he had even rehearsed a scene with Ryan Reynolds. But
Hmm.
once the crew found out that he was going to be playing Doom, they decided to cut the cameo.
Hmm.
Mm.
So that would have been interesting.
Tony Stark playing off of Wade Wilson would have been a blast.
I mean,
Mhm.
we may still get that in Secret Wars. You never know.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate it.
And we don't exactly know what version of Doom Downey is going to be playing. He could be playing a version of Tony that becomes Doom or something along those lines. So
Yeah, that's a
we'll
whole rabbit
see.
hole.
Listen, I'm happy to
Yes,
be
yeah.
wrong, but I don't care what they say. I assume this is going to be a version of Tony Stark. I think they're even going
That's
to
what I've been thinking too.
I think they're even going to actively try to lie about it, and I'm certainly not unique to have that read.
Yeah.
Everyone's thought about it, but I just I can't think of another good reason to do it other than for that to be a reveal.
And you know what? Andrew Garfield swore up, down, left, right, and center that he
Yeah,
was not in No Way Home. So even so much as lying to Emma Stone when she texted him
yeah,
about it, and then afterwards she's like, "You fucking liar!" And he's like, "I'm sorry. They made me promise."
yeah.
One of my favorite, most charming things ever.
But
Yes, yeah,
happy to be wrong too. So
yes, yeah. I mean, look, I even with I know a lot of like talking about the multiverse stuff and miss after miss after miss. Like honestly, I've enjoyed a lot of these recent Marvel movies too. Like there have been bumps and it hasn't reached the highs of the Infinity Saga, but
mhm.
I don't think it's been like the complete train wreck that so many people on the internet like to portray it as either.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Just, except for Secret Invasion. That was the only one that was an
Yeah,
actual
that's
really horrifying.
Yeah. But even Marvel seems to have decided that Secret Invasion didn't happen. So if we can go by the
Nope.
Marvels.
No
All right.
baby Drax arm.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Why don't you tell people where they can find your stuff? Randy, go ahead.
All right. Well, you can find Kris and I on our podcast, Media Lit, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Twitter at Media Lit Pod. You can find us on Instagram at media.lit.pod. Uh, you can find us over on Blue Sky, etc. And we would love to interact with you. We'd especially love to get emails from you at media.slash.lit@gmail.com. We want to know what stories mean a lot to you, things you'd love to see us cover. We'd love to hear your insights into some of the properties we've talked about, what they mean to you, what angles we might have missed. Those are all the interactions that we're here for, and we cannot wait for. And you can also find some of my writing over at the Pop Break Digital Culture magazine. A lot of Bluey, a lot of House of the Dragon, a lot of Doctor Who, who's my main beat over there. And I'll be doing some Severance season 2 coverage in the new year. I'm really pumped for that. That's one of my favorite shows of the last 5 years. Yeah, so that's where you can find me.
Kris, anything else to add?
Yeah, in addition to co-hosting Media Lit, I'm also the co-host of the Batman by the Numbers podcast, where we've had the pleasure of having both Perry and Randy on as guests in the recent past. We talk all things Batman. We are getting ready to wrap up a year of the villain with a big villain draft in the coming weeks. So you can find that on the Pop Break podcast feed. I'm also an actor and a voice actor, a father, and a husband. You can find me doing those things on the Instagram at Kris_Ingersol. That's Kris spelled like Kringle.
Speaking of the Pop Break podcast feed, I failed to shout out Pod of Doom, a Black Sabbath appreciation podcast that I do with Justin and Chris Mancini. We just released our episode on Master of Reality, my favorite album so far in our re-listen.
Okay, very cool. So guys, check out those things in the show notes. We'll have links to some of that stuff. And as for us, superherocinephiles.com is the website. We are Super Cinema Pod, mostly on Blue Sky, but we do have post-release announcements. Ugh, I can't speak anymore. On Instagram and Threads and Facebook, so you can find us there. Super Cinema Pod, basically on everything. And 200 episodes. This is who knew there were who knew that there are over 200 superhero movies, but there's still a lot to cover. So I'm not going anywhere. We still got more stuff to talk about, more stuff that's going to be coming down the pike. But guys, thank you so much for listening for 200 episodes. And Kris and Randy, thanks for being here for the 200th episode. And thanks for sitting around and talking for, we're going on 2 hours now, this conversation. Really appreciate it.
And hey, man, congrats on 200 episodes. That's such an accomplishment. Yeah. We're about to finish up our first year of 20 some episodes, so you've done a hell of a lot of work, and
thank you.
It's just impressive. You should be very proud.
Thank you. All right, well, that does it for all. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Superhero Cinephiles is produced by me, Percival Constantine. The show is created by myself and the late great Derek Ferguson, our host emeritus. Visit us on the web at superherocinephiles.com to listen to past episodes or find out how you can be a guest yourself. Support the show by visiting our advertiser links or click the Buy Me a Coffee link on the website to make a one-time donation. We are Super Cinema Pod on both Instagram and Blue Sky, so please be sure to follow us. We'd also appreciate if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and share us with your friends.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.